and we'd be happy to get it out to you. As I said, this day, July 13th, is the 100th anniversary of the vision, the apparition of our Blessed Mother to the shepherd children in Fatima, where she showed them a vision of hell. And in her memoirs, Sister Lucia described the vision of hell that Our Lady showed them. And I remember, it's hard to believe, but, Hollywood used to make movies that were worth watching. And for me, it's always amazing to realize that in 1942 or 44, early 40s, whatever the year was, the best picture of the year that year, the best picture, that won the Oscar for Best Picture, was The Song of Bernadette, the story of Our Lady of Lourdes. Isn't that amazing? That Hollywood produced and recognized and awarded a film that told the story of Bernadette and the vision of Our Lady at Lourdes. Won Best Picture. I think also Jennifer Jones, who was the actress who played Bernadette, also won Best Actress. And then in the 1950s, early, I think 52, Warner Brothers made a film on Our Lady of Fatima, the story of Fatima, a major motion picture. And I remember I was in grammar school about 10 years after it was made, in 1962. I was either first or second grade, and it must have been movie day at the school, and I was at St. Joseph's Elementary School up in Bogota, which is in Bergen County, New Jersey. That's where I went to school the first 3 or 4 years before we moved to Central Jersey. But I remember the entire student body going to the gymnasium or the auditorium, and we watched the movie of Fatima. And I remember the scene. I must have been in first or second grade, but the scene of hell in the movie scared me. I remember I was so frightened by that. It really put the fear of God in me, and the way they depicted it. And it was based on, of course, what happened 100 years ago today in Fatima, when our Blessed Mother appeared to the shepherd children and showed them a vision of hell. So I just want to share with you a little bit of this from Lucia's memoirs, Sister Lucia's memoirs, her own words, her own writing, about what she saw that day. Now remember, we're talking about 7, 9, and 10-year-old here. I think Francisco was 7. Jacinta was 7, Francisco was 9, and Lucia was 10, around those ages. And this is how Lucia described that particular vision. Listen to her. These are her own words from her memoirs. She, meaning Our Lady, opened her hands once more, as she had done the 2 previous months. The rays of light appeared to penetrate the earth, and we saw, as it were, a vast sea of fire. Plunged in this fire, we saw the demons and the souls of the damned. The latter were like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, having human forms. They were floating about in that conflagration, now raised into the air by the flames which issued from within themselves, together with great clouds of smoke. Now they fell back on every side like sparks in the huge fires, without weight or equilibrium, amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified us and made us tremble with fright. It must have been this sight which caused me to cry out, as people say they heard me. Remember, there was that scene where of course, the people couldn't see the vision of hell, but they saw Lucia cry out. And Lucia writes, "The demons were distinguished from the souls of the damned by their terrifying and repellent likeness to be frightful and unknown animals, black and transparent like burning coals. That vision only lasted for a moment, thanks to our good Heavenly Mother, who at the first apparition had promised to take us to heaven. Without that, I think we would have died of terror and fear. So, obviously, a very real vision for Lucia and the children. So much so that had it not been in a previous vision, she writes, had it not been that our Blessed Mother had promised to take the children to heaven one day, that without that knowledge, without that consolation, that they would have died of terror and fear. But listen again to how she describes hell. You know, this isn't fantasy. This isn't some horror movie. This is real. And we know, and we have to believe, that heaven and hell are very, very real states of existence. And we will go one place or the other. Right? I mean, this is a fact. We don't just, at the moment of our death, vanish and cease to exist. When we die, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to go before God. And of course, we know that it isn't God who sends us to hell. The soul sends him or herself there. With that self-awareness, that self-knowledge, and that denial of God's mercy. Let me see if I can grab my diary here for a second. One of my favorite passages in the diary of Faustina, because I want to get to this as well and kind of go to it. Let's see, do I have it? I should have marked it off. Oh. Did I mark it off? I think I did. Sinful soul in it. Hang on. I'm looking through my book here for those of you who can't see into the... Let's see. Well, I'll get to it in a second, but in the... Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, there. 1486. I'll get to that in a second. Let me read again some of the highlights, if you want to call it that, of this vision of hell, and just try to place ourselves in the position of these young children. I mean, they're seeing our beautiful Blessed Mother, and they're drawing great comfort from that. And as she had appeared to them previously, 2 months previous, in May and June on the 13th of each month. But now she comes with them, and she again opens her hands, as she had done the 2 previous times, and light appeared, this time to penetrate the earth. And opened the earth, and they said, a vast sea of fire. And plunged in this fire, she said, we saw the demons and the souls of the damned. Now, the church has never taught, and never, the way that our church does in the list of saints, the canon of saints, say that there are certain souls who are in heaven. And the church teaches that. And they're the saints that we honor, we venerate. The church will say by name who's in heaven. Not everybody who's in heaven, but will specific in certain individuals who, because of heroic virtue, and will say that person is in heaven. Saint Joseph, all the you go down the list. But the church has never said by name who's in hell. The church says hell is a very real state of existence, state of being, and people may go there. But never, said anyone in particular by name is there, the way she does with the saints. But here, this vision of hell indicates that there are souls, unfortunately, who are there. Plunged in this fire, we saw the demons and the souls of the damned. The latter were like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, having human forms. Could you really imagine knowing and being aware? Because when we pass on from this life into the next, we will take with us our intellect and our memory. We'll be very much aware of where we are. Could you imagine being aware in this state that you will never, ever, 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 ever leave it? It's eternal. It's hard for us to even conceptualize, I guess, what an eternal life is. You know, we live this life, we go to bed at night, we sleep, we wake up, we go through our routine, we go to work or do whatever we do during the day, go back to bed, and it just continues, goes on. But we know that this life as we know it is going to end one day. And we're going to live on in another state of being. And if we choose, by both our actions here on earth and our refusal of God's mercy and love, we will end up here in this place that Our Lady showed them. These, what she called transparent burning embers, blackened or burnished bronze, having human forms, were floating about in the conflagration, now raised into the air by the flames which issued from within themselves, together with great clouds of smoke. And they fell back on every side like sparks in huge fires, without weight or equilibrium. And this is the part, well, it all scares me, this part, amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which Lucia said horrified us and literally made the children tremble when they saw this. So much so that she screamed, she cried out. And Our Lady wasn't doing that to scare the children. She's not doing that to harm the children emotionally, but to show the reality that there is such a state of being, there is such a place, quote-unquote place, where people do go. You know, we live this life, my friends, and we go through our life, and we talk about it, we know, we fall, we all sin, we all make mistakes, we all offend God, sometimes grievously offend God. But that's why our loving Father sent His only begotten Son into this world. Not to condemn us, but to save us. Now we can read these words written by Lucia herself, describing the vision of this very real state of being known as hell. But I'm always very comforted, not to be presumptuous, but comforted by what Jesus revealed to Saint Faustina. And she wrote in her diary, "Divine Mercy in my soul." These conversations of the merciful God with different souls, state of existence, state of being. And in paragraph 1486, I'm going to read this to you because we have to listen to this description. This conversation of the merciful God with a despairing soul. We don't know what happens at that moment of death. We don't know what happens at that moment of separation. You know, I was watching the news this morning, and they had on the beautiful young daughter of that New York City police officer who was assassinated recently. Very well-spoken young 20-year-old, the daughter. And she was saying how when the police department or the police officers came to her home in the middle of the night to tell her that her mother, police officer, had been hurt and was in the hospital. the young lady said that she went to the hospital and realized that her mother was in very, very serious condition. She was on life support. And she said that she prayed over her mother and held her hand when they removed the life support. And her mother passed on. I've never been in the presence of someone at the moment of death. I've been in the presence of people who were dying. Maybe some of you have been. And we've heard beautiful stories about what happens when someone dies in many cases. We don't know what happens. I know when my father was passing, he was in his nursing home, and the nurses later told us, because he died about 5 o'clock in the morning. He was 93 years old and lived a good life. But they said all night long, now my mother had passed away a few years earlier. In fact, we're going to be celebrating the anniversary, remembering the anniversary of her death this coming Saturday, it was July 15th in 2011 that she passed. My father died a couple years later. But the nurses said that when he was in his hospital room that night, as I said, he died 5 o'clock in the morning, but all night long, they said, he was calling out, "Lydia, Lydia." My mother's name is Lydia, Lydia. And the funny thing is that I never ever heard him call her Lydia when he was alive. He always called her Lyd. I never really heard him call her Lydia, but in his transition during his period of dying, he was calling out to Lydia, her baptismal name, her baptized name. And you wonder, was she there to take him to the next existence, the next state of being? Was she there to accompany him, I pray, into heaven? We don't know what happens, right? But all we do know is that at that moment, we are going to face God. We're going to see God as he truly is. And the description of hell that I just shared with you from Sister Lucia, from her memoirs, it's her actual words, her own writing, pretty frightening. But I also take great comfort in, as I said, what Jesus revealed, or St. Faustina said Jesus revealed to her, and she wrote down in her diary, paragraph 1486. Let me read this to you. I read it to you before, but let's read it again because it gives me great comfort, and it shows the immense and unfathomable mercy that God extends to us. These are words from Jesus himself. He said, and this is what Faustina writes, Jesus saying, "O soul steeped in darkness, do not despair." So this is that, whatever that, I remember hearing Father Groeschel one time saying that a nanosecond of time between the moment we cease to be in this life, we die, but our soul passes on, and we go outside of time, and we come face to face with the merciful God. According to Jesus, "O soul steeped in darkness, do not despair. All is not yet lost. Come and confide in your God, who is love and mercy." And then Faustina writes, "But the soul, deaf even to this appeal, wraps itself in darkness." So the soul is aware of its state. Jesus calls out and he says, all is not yet lost. And then Jesus calls out again, a second time, to the soul. "My child, listen to the voice of your merciful Father." And Faustina writes, "In the soul arises this reply." So the despairing soul says, for me, there is no mercy. The soul that has committed enormous, multiple sins, the soul that has turned its back on God in this life, the soul that has not loved, the soul that has greatly and gravely sinned. Faustina writes, and it falls into greater darkness, a despair which is a foretaste of hell and makes it unable to draw near to God. So the soul itself despairing. Faustina writes, Jesus calls to the soul a third time, but the soul remains deaf and blind, hardened and despairing. And then listen, my friends, then the mercy of God begins to exert itself, and without any cooperation from the soul, God grants it final grace. If this too is spurned, if the soul says and refuses that grace, God will leave the soul in this self-chosen disposition for eternity. And that is despair, no hope, as Faustina describes the souls of the damned here in her vision of hell that Our Lady showed them, in great pain and despair for eternity. God didn't do that. God offered multiple chances. And then God granting the final grace. If that grace is spurned, God will leave the soul in this self-chosen disposition for all eternity. Then, Faustina writes, this grace emerges from the merciful heart of Jesus and gives the soul a special light by means of which the soul begins to understand God's effort. So this wonderful grace that God grants to the soul, coming from the merciful heart of Jesus, giving the soul this special light, this means by which the soul can begin to understand God's effort. But Faustina writes, but conversion depends on its own will. So it's the soul that decides. The soul knows that this, for her, is final grace. And should it show even a flicker of goodwill, the mercy of God will accomplish the rest. So God, in his great love for all of his children, you think of the most hardened of sinners that have walked this earth, and we can name a few of them by name. I won't go into the list here, but you can think of who they are. Even they, my brothers and sisters, even they, according to the Diary of Faustina and the revelation of Jesus Christ to Saint Faustina, even they will be given a chance. It's not just to commit the sin of presumption and say, oh, well, then I don't need to go to confession. I don't need to. No, we have to go. We have to do what we have to do here. We have to make the effort here. You and I, who have been given much, we're going to be held responsible for a great deal. I don't think Attila the Hun was, a daily communicant or going to confession in any way. He didn't know about that. We who know these things, we have to, more will be required of us in this life and in the end. But think about this particular scene, as described by Jesus to Faustina. We don't want to commit the sin of presumption, but we can take great solace in this and consolation in what awaits us. Or more so, I think of, I pray that I will not be despairing before the Lord. I pray that I certainly will beg for his mercy for my many sins and forgiveness. But we think about people who have left this life in the state of despair. That even then, in that, as Father Benedict described it, a nanosecond of time between death in this life and judgment, that there was this opportunity. So as we remember the 100th anniversary of that vision of hell that so scared the Fatima children and frightened me, too, when I was in second grade and saw the movie, there is always hope in Christ. There is always, he's the reason for our hope. And there's always hope in the mercy of God. Let me take a break. When I come back.